Welcome to the Leadership Excellence Podcast. I'm your co-host, George Trachilis, and with me as always is the insightful Dr. Tom Lawless.
Great to be here, George. Dr. Leiker's focus on culture and development are more relevant than ever.
For our listeners, we want you to go deeper and access all of Dr. Leiker's lessons. Go to ow64.com and download our app. Let's dive into this week's essential lesson on developing leadership skills.
The next exceptional person in the Toyota line who's not in the family was Taiichi Ohno. And he turned Kiichiro Toyota's vision of just-in-time into reality. He didn't do it in one step. Like Taiichi Toyota, took many experiments, trial and error, starting with a cell, or we know as the U-shaped cell. Taiichi Ohno did it in a machine shop with many different kinds of machines. And he learned through that process that to really get productivity at any level and be able to adjust to customer demand, he needed people to be very flexible. He wanted to run this cell of lots of different machines with one person or two people or six people, depending on demand. So people had to learn multiple jobs to run a lathe, to run a drill, and they didn't want to do it. So this started Ohno's learning about how to influence and motivate people. And he realized to do that, he had to be on the shop floor with the people, watching them struggle, asking them questions, challenging them, and learning to be a coach. And that's the beginnings of the Toyota production system. As he expanded from a cell to getting parts to the line, he eventually came up with a Kanban system. He later learned that in order to have a reliable cell, you needed standardized work. And you needed a way to teach people, which was the job instruction training method. And then to connect that cell to other processes that were not next to the cell, he needed to hold a small amount of inventory and replenish it using a Kanban. So again, over time, over decades, pieces of the Toyota production system, pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Finally, it was written down, and it was written down over the objections of Taiichi Ohno. Why would he care? Why would he object to a simple diagram? The reason was that from Ohno's point of view, the Toyota production system was a living, breathing, evolving entity. It was the ideas of people as they were at the gemba, and they were discovering weaknesses, they were overcoming those weaknesses, and they were learning. And he was afraid that as soon as you write it down and it becomes a static picture, that Kaizen will end. So he, in fact, was known to see somebody writing some sort of image of the Toyota production system, and he would tear it up. He would say, if you write it down, you kill it. Don't write it down. But later in life, he apparently got a little more laid back, and he allowed people to write it down, and it got represented as a house, because a house is a system. So if you take away the structures that hold up the roof will collapse. If the roof is weak, the roof will leak. If there's a poor foundation, the whole house will collapse. So every part of it is necessary for the system to function. And at the center of the system are people continuously improving using Kaizen. The two pillars you might recognize now as the two contributions of Seikichi Toyota and Kiichiro Toyota. Seikichi Toyota's Jidoka, which is translated today as stop and fix problems, or surface problems and solve them. And then we have Kiichiro Toyota's just-in-time, the right part, right time, right amount, and doing this without inventory, without waste. So one-piece flow, give the customer what they want, when they want it, which is really an impossible dream if you think about it. If you can imagine any type of service that you get on demand that works 100% of the time, you've got something better than anything I've seen. But the goal was not to implement just-in-time. The goal was for just-in-time to be a vision, an ideal, and for Jidoka to also be a vision, which would be zero defects. Everything that you do perfectly. So this vision is what drives Kaizen. The Kaizen is driving for perfection, and therefore it never ends because you never reach perfection. At the base of the house, the foundation is operational stability. It's very disciplined people who follow the standardized work. It's having well-maintained equipment, which again requires very disciplined people who are doing their preventative maintenance, who are learning from machine downtime to solve the problem, and they're constantly working to achieve the standard. Standard keeps on getting tougher and tougher. So you can see the value and the why people are at the center, right? People have the discipline to maintain every aspect of the system, from preventative maintenance to solving quality problems to solving problems of running low on parts. Trucks break down, that's a problem. People have to solve that. If people stop thinking, because they simply execute what some expert, say a black belt, were to come up with, then the system would fail because conditions change and people would be unadaptable. For example, imagine a pilot having a plan before the plane takes off, and the pilot's instructed, no matter what happens, don't adjust the plan. You run into a storm, follow the plan. The plane's going to go down. So people are at the center, and who is it that drives these people to push themselves? Very few people have the self-discipline to constantly push themselves to get better and better, and the driving force is leadership. Lean today has become a global movement. There's Lean, Six Sigma, and unfortunately what we see is a shadow of the Toyota way or the Toyota production system. For example, we can walk into a factory or an office or a hospital and see posters, charts, 5S. We can see Kanban systems for replenishment, and in cultural terms, those would all be artifacts. It would be like finding a vase from the 1st century and then trying to interpret what this vase means. If we go down to try to understand the meaning behind these artifacts and behaviors, we get norms and values. And the norms and values often are translated into follow the rules, meet the targets, have experts who have black belts who lead lean projects. This represents what we would call a bureaucracy, a rigid bureaucracy, and in fact it's what Frederick Taylor was creating in his scientific management. In fact, he was very clear the only thinkers should be the industrial engineers, and the workers should be doing what the management tells them to do, and the management should be telling them to follow the principles of the industrial engineers. So in that system, with people not thinking, there can be no adaptation unless the industrial engineers come up with the ideas. And they're spread very thin, often across multiple factories. The underlying assumption that leads to this misinterpretation of the Toyota production system is that the most important part of respect for people is respecting shareholders. They're the owners of the business, and they should expect quarterly returns, which means you have to drive stock prices, and you should justify any investment you make, including in people development, including in lean, through a clear ROI. If you don't get the ROI, you shouldn't do it, which means you're going to cherry pick and pick only those projects that have a clear, direct cause and effect. Spend the money, I get results, I report them to the shareholders. This is very different from building up a strong capability and striving toward a vision of perfection. And now, what Toyota would say is that if you strive for perfection, if you're constantly improving your products and services, keeping your customers satisfied, then the profits will follow. I mean, it's on the one hand, satisfying customers so you get revenue. On the other hand, you're using the same Kaizen methods to reduce cost, so you're reducing the cost side of the equation. And that will lead to profits. But if you jump ahead and just say, we will not do anything unless we make a profit, you'll never make the investments, you won't have satisfied customers, and eventually you'll run out of steam and the organization will go out of business. What are we really talking about by the Toyota production system? Now we think of TPS. we may immediately think of manufacturing and Kanban and tools and machines, but really that was never what TPS was about. In fact, one of the students of Taiichi Ohno said, "We made a mistake. We should never have called it the data production system. We should have called it the thinking production system, because the real point of everything is to make people think." Even a simple Kanban, we have a Kanban in every container, and if I see that there's a container without a Kanban, I have to think, why did a container move without a Kanban? If I have 10 bins of inventory, I take out one Kanban, and now I have 9 bins of inventory in circulation. Now my processes are going to shut down more quickly if I have a problem. Again, that forces people to think. So really the essence of TPS is, on the one hand, identify problems. On the other hand, identify and test solutions so you can learn and continuously improve.
Okay, Tom, this is awesome. I love that video with Jeff talking about the thinking production system. Now, I got a question for you. How does writing down TPS risk leaders, shifting leaders' thinking from coaching to policy compliance?
You know, George, that's a great question. Ohno felt that TPS was a living, breathing, evolving entity. He was known to tear up written instructions and say, if you write it down, you kill it. Don't write it down. When TPS became a house diagram, it became teachable, but also dangerously simplified. Leaders could point to the pillars and say, install JIT, install Jidoka. The risk is subtle, right? Instead of asking what problems are trying to surface, leaders would start asking, are you following the standard? The moment we equate documentation with understanding, coaching turns into auditing. The house becomes a checklist, and when that happens, Kaizen slows down because people stop experimenting. They wait for instructions. Ohno feared that freezing the system in a diagram would freeze thinking itself. His thought, because a lot of people thought that, well, he just, he didn't want to share the Toyota production system, and it wasn't that. Like I said it here a minute ago, he just knew that if he put it in paper, it would freeze thinking. So George, if just-in-time and Jidoka are visions of perfection rather than implementation targets, how should a lean coach respond when executives demand quick ROI?
Wow, what a tough question. So the coach has to reframe the conversation from tools to capability. Instead of talking about just-in-time as a cost-cutting initiative, it becomes a vision delivering exactly what the customer needs without waste. It becomes a driver of learning. So what are you learning? What are you going to do next? And then when executives push ROI, the coach must ask, are we building short-term financial gains or long-term organizational muscle? It's really who's the coach in this case? It's got to be the person that knows what TPS is about and helps the owners guide, towards increased capability versus short-term results. So today's philosophy suggests that the customer satisfaction, cost reduction, follow capability building, not the other way around. So the coach's role is to protect the vision while speaking the language of business, which is tough to do. That tension is leadership work. So Tom, what is the danger of defining respect for people as primarily respect for the shareholders?
That's a really good question. That definition shifts the entire moral center of the system, right? If shareholders become the primary stakeholder, then quarterly results dominate the decisions. Investments in people become optional. Development becomes justified only if the measurable short-term returns are in. Where in contrast, TPS places people at the center, not symbolically, but operationally. People are the engine of problem solving. If you prioritize shareholders over capability, you cherry pick projects. You stop taking risk in developing thinking. And over time, adaptability erodes. It's the difference between extracting value and creating value. George, how does operational stability quietly determine whether Kaizen thrives or becomes a theater?
Oh, wow. Good one. Operational stability, as we know, it's the foundation of the house. When you look at it, if you don't have a good foundation, everything falls apart. The machines break down constantly, standards aren't followed, Kaizen becomes reactive firefighting. There is no such thing as Kaizen. The discipline to maintain equipment, follow standardized work, and learn from downtime creates a stable baseline. Stability exposes abnormality. So you're looking for what is out of standard or what is abnormal. If leaders ignore this foundation, they compensate with slogans, events, posters. There's all these other things that come up. I used to call it, it's the Christmas tree effect. You know, somebody comes into the plant, the Christmas tree, the lights go on, but it's empty. So that's when lean becomes theater. Real Kaizen requires a stable stage. And I know there's a lot of people out there that like chaos. I've heard it even 2 days ago. I kind of like the chaos, right? So this is a problem. We got to be thinking like farmers. We like stability. We like to increase our capability. And so you want managers to develop themselves to be farmers, and they're just increasing capability. Forget the chaos. So Tom, in this case, TPS is a real thinking production system. I love it because when I heard that, and when I heard Jeff talk about that, what happened for me was I thought about how I implemented way back. It was never about the thinking. It was about let's do this and let's do that. Let's do 5S. And it wasn't about what problem do we have and how do we quickly test possible solutions. Not solutions, but possible solutions, like we call them countermeasures. So what specific leader behavior stimulate or suppress this kind of thinking on the shop floor?
Wow. Well, you know, from what I see, stimulating thinking requires presence. Ohno learned he had to be on the shop floor watching, asking questions, and challenging assumptions. Leaders stimulate thinking when they ask why. Why? They allow controlled struggle. They remove fear of surfacing problems, right? Because everybody's afraid to say something. Get that fear out. Model curiosity. They suppress thinking when they provide answers too quickly, reward compliance over insight, delegate improvement to experts, and punish mistakes harshly. And I think that is huge. Do not punish mistakes. They are opportunities to learn. If people stop thinking and simply execute, the system collapses under change. Thinking's not optional. It's the core design principle. Why did Ohno start with flexible people in a cell rather than Kanban or standard work as the first move, George?
Yeah, wow. In this case, he started off with people resisting. That's what they did. And he had to be out on the shop floor with them, building that relationship. But flexibility exposes the reality of the situation. When one person must run multiple machines depending on demand, waste becomes visible. That's the key. So imbalances become obvious. Skill gaps surface. These are problems, and problems are treasures. So starting with tools like Kanban, this is a tool that will expose a problem. Whether the Kanban card goes missing, whether the inventory is too much or too low, whether the quantity is not the right amount. So Kanban would have an automated existing dysfunction. Instead, he began with people learning multiple jobs that forced adaptation. It also required motivation and coaching. Flexibility was not about efficiency first. It was about learning capacity. Once people could flex, then standardized work and Kanban could connect processes reliably. Now, so the first move was human, not technical. The second move was the technical move. And when we started this, it was technical first. We were just trying to do stuff. So that's where the big mistake was and the big interpretation. We always copied the Toyota production system, but we never copied, blindly by the way, we never copied the thinking production system. What was behind the name. Yeah. So we want to be thinkers. So what happens, Tom, when an organization's long-term capability, when lean is reduced to projects led by experts instead of daily Kaizen by everybody improving everywhere, every day, versus, lean?
Well, it becomes dependent. One thing I'll bring up real quick is, this is Frederick Taylor came up with this type of a view well over 100 years ago, and he said that workers are to do what the boss says and nothing more, right? Well, that thought process is experts think, workers execute. Improvement slows down when that happens. Adaptation becomes episodic instead of continuous. It takes people 10 times longer to improve. If we shortcut people development, we create fragile gains. Daily Kaizen builds internal capability. Expert-led projects build isolation. In the long term, organizations that invest in thinking outlast those that invest in tools. George, by saying that, all of the great thinkers have emphasized this over and over. Deming said it, right? Toyota said it. You could just go down the list. And what do we still today lack? We lack training. We lack self-development. We lack people that people are afraid to say something. Anyway, George, after walking through all this, I'm realizing something. TPS was never primarily about efficiency, was it?
No. Efficiency is the byproduct. The real focus is cultivating disciplined people, thinking people, and people that are using the gemba as their teacher.
That's the shift, isn't it? Most organizations chase efficiency because it's measurable, but TPS is chasing something different. It's capability.
Yeah, exactly. It's about developing people who can see problems, think critically, and continually improve. The tools only matter when they stimulate thinking.
Yeah. And that's why just-in-time and Jidoka are visions of perfection, not cost reduction tactics.
Right. They're ideals that stretch people, not because they guarantee quarterly returns, but because striving toward them, like an ideal state, builds enduring excellence.
So the real competitive advantage isn't Kanban. It isn't standard work. It isn't even the house diagram.
Yeah, it's disciplined people who pursue perfection together.
Which means lean leadership isn't about installing systems.
No, it's about developing people. People first.
People who can evolve the system.
Yeah, and who keep evolving long after the original leaders are gone. So this is succession planning.
Yeah, great. So maybe TPS was always less a production system.
Yeah, and more people development, which brings me to this story, Tom. I went to Liverpool, talked at a company, and there was another high-powered consultant there. He's probably way more well-known than I am. And it was all about systems. And I was thinking, at the center of all this has to be people development. I shared that with them, but they never got it. So I think with the language, it's important. If you want to communicate to a CEO, yeah, tell them I'm going to implement a system that's going to get you results. But if you want long-term results, start educating them on capability.
Yeah, that might be the most important takeaway of them all. So you may want to develop a skill from all this information. One skill to develop over the next 2 weeks. For everybody that's watching, asking better why questions. If TPS is fundamentally about developing thinking people, then one practical skill the audience can take away and build on immediately is the disciplined practice of asking thoughtful, layered why questions. Not rapid fire interrogation, not blame seeking, but structured curiosity.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That's really good. And if you want to know how to do this structured, layered why questions, look up the Socratic method. Figure out how to fold a question into itself and dig a little deeper on that topic, and you'll get it right. So develop that skill. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
We hope this episode gave you something practical to apply this week.
Yeah, thank you for joining us for this episode of Leadership Excellence Podcast. And remember, if you want the 75 leadership lesson set, all you have to do is go to ow64.com and download our app. Join myself and Dr. Tom Lawless next time for more essential discussion on this topic.